So now the question is, how are we going to go about building that confidence interval that contains the population parameter that we are after? Okay, it gets a little bit technical. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our point estimate. So for example, we had a sample with a mean of 6.5. So we're going to put 6.5 in a center of the interval, and that's going to be our point estimate. And then we want to give some wiggle room, so to speak. We're going to call this margin of error. So we have a margin of error to the right and margin of error to the left. So this side of the interval is going to be our point estimate minus some margin of error, and at this end of the interval we're going to have our point estimate plus some margin of error. Now let's talk about this interval. We want this interval to be as tight as possible. We don't want, our endpoints to run indefinitely into both sides. For example, if we apply it to estimating gas prices, we don't want to say, oh, your gas prices are going to be between $0 and $20 per gallon. Are we going to catch our population mean that way? Yes, for sure. But the question is it a usable information? And I think you would agree with me that it's not very usable. So we want this interval to be as tight as possible, but also we want to make sure that we do catch our population mean in this case with our estimation. What's going to help in making this interval as tight as possible? Well, there's two factors that play a role. First of all, our sample size. So the greater our sample size, the better estimate we will get for our population mean, the tighter the interval is. However, sometimes getting a large sample could be costly. So what's another factor? Another factor is our accuracy, like we already mentioned. So the question is, how accurate do we have to be? Like, can we sacrifice a little bit of accuracy so that we don't have to get a large sample size? So those are the questions that you want to consider before diving into building a confidence interval. For our homework purposes, those parameters will be given to you. You will be given a sample size. You will be given the accuracy that you want and that you are going to use, and you're going to calculate your margin of error accordingly. Now, calculating margin of error is a technical thing, and we need to go over some of the vocabulary and parameters that you need to know in order to calculate the margin of error. But before we get there, I also wanted to mention that margin of error is sometimes called a radius of the interval. Okay, margin of error is the radius of the interval. You may see this terminology somewhere. And also we could write, the way we can write our intervals, we can use this notation, or we could use interval notation, where we would have some number on the left. This number is called the lower bound. So lower bound of the interval. And then comma and our value on the right, which is called the upper bound of the interval. So that's another way to write it. One more way is to write our point estimate and then plus or minus the margin of error, which we'll calculate. So for our example, we would write 6.50 instead of X bar, and the margin of error still needs to be calculated. So let's go over some technical terms that we'll need for building the confidence interval.